Kauffman, and I'm on a mission to connect with every creative writer in the world. I need your help. The world is constantly changing, which is why it's our duty, no, it's our responsibility to inspire creativity. My creative writing tips, tricks, and strategies are gonna help you become a better writer, so that way you can beat procrastination. Do you have a story that you're dying to tell, but you don't know what to do next? I can actually help you craft a story today. Welcome to Kauffman Writes, the #1 creative writing live stream on the internet for inspiration, motivation, strategy, discussion, and maybe a little bit of procrastination. But don't worry, I won't tell anyone. So you found yourself in our day of our Story Structure Tuesday. And what better way to start it off with discussing how can you craft the perfect story structure for your next novel? Maybe you're wondering, okay, how do I structure my story correctly? Or what's the right way to structure a story? Don't worry, we're going to get into that right now. Now, for today's stream, what we'll do is we'll hop into describing story structure, defining like what it is, and we'll talk about it a little bit, and I'll give you some value if there's any story structure opportunities that you're dealing with. Then we're going to hop into our first of 2 writing sprints, 20 minutes apiece, while I'll work on Last Scarecrow, and you can watch along, join me in the process. And then after that, we'll discuss what are the common problems that writers deal with when trying to structure their story. Perfect. And if you're watching this on the replay, my friends, don't worry, because you'll be able to skip ahead to the part of the video that you find the most value from. All right, so let's hop straight into it. How do you structure a story? How do you format it? How do you make sure that it feels realistic, that it feels normal, and that it feels like it's following a true journey? So when I think about story structure, I think it's a combination of the way that you develop your plot. It's a combination of the way the character's journey goes. And then it's also a matter of the technical aspect of it, right? It's the grammatical and the technical. If your paragraphs aren't formatted correctly, if you're not using proper dialogue tags or speech tags, things are going to be off about it, or things will just feel like it's wrong. And a lot of the time, the thing with the technical side of it is they could be so easily fixed. The technical easy things could be so easily fixed. And the problem is that a lot of the times, if somebody reads your story and there's a lot of technical issues with it, whether that's formatting, dialogue, or even like the way characters are speaking, if it doesn't look correct, at least the way we're assuming it should be, people are going to tune out from your story. And it could be the most amazing story in the world, but if it's not structured correctly, you got a problem. That is an easy solution to have. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull up this and let me check the comments. Hey, what's up? Silent in the house. Welcome, welcome, my friend, to Story Structure Tuesday. So as I dig in, and I really wanted to evolve on this idea. And by the way, if you're just hopping into the stream, I'm doing something new this week. We're focusing each day on a specific element of creative writing. All right, so let's make sure you can see that. So what elements go into a story structure? Your plot. Ooh, that looks like that could be bigger. Let's up this. Beautiful. All right, much better. So you got your plot, and there we go. Your character journey and the technical aspects of your story. So these are the 3 elements that go into having a well-structured story. All right. So how do I make sure that each of these 3 elements, that the story structure, let me try that. Yeah, it's not too bad. Okay, so how do I make sure that each of these 3 story elements work so that way you don't lose a reader immediately, or that way you don't like lose somebody when it's like could be so easily fixed? So the first thing with plot. Now, we actually went into Plot Point Mondays. We actually touched upon that yesterday. So if you want some tips on developing plot or narrative for your story, go check out yesterday's stream. Don't forget to subscribe, and that way you'll be alerted when I drop my new live streams and writing help content. So, plot. How do you structure plot so that way it works? You want to follow a thematic storytelling journey. I like to use the 3-act structure. That's just something that I use personally, but there's different types of story structures out there. The 3-act journey is one that I like to use. It's also at the heart, one of the most popular journeys is the hero's journey. My favorite, the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell. If you don't know what the hero's journey is, or you haven't read it before, I want you to go Google it after this live stream and go just look up some key points about what is the hero's journey. It is absolutely critical if you're working on a novel or you want to structure your character journey in a way that feels natural. A lot of common story structure elements we see in this day and age, at heart, there's a lot of elements that derive heavily from the hero's journey. So that's like the hero's Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey is the grandfather of a character arcs. So we touched into character journey. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put my hero's journey down here. I feel like hero's journey can go into, let's see, Joseph Campbell can actually work for both the character journey and it can work for the plot, because sometimes they go hand in hand. Now, there's always going to be crossover, right? There's going to be times where the plot is so important and the plot is used to develop the character. There's going to be times where the character has actions that further the plot. But what we're doing is we're looking at this as from a bigger level, and how are they forming together so that way the story feels structured correctly. You don't want to start the story off of the most intense moment of the hero's journey. You don't want to start off with the scene. You want the overall story to be like the worst thing they're dealing with, but you don't want the specific scene to start off with the worst moment of the entire story. Otherwise, the rest of the story is going to be boring. However, before you go away, there's ways that this can be done, right? A lot of the times when you start off at the climax scene, we see it in movies all the time, start off in the climax and then it freezes and they're like, oh, but this is how I got here, right? And they use the climax moment as a way to hook you in and then tell the story leading up to the climax. That is one absolute perfect way to structure it, but that method would not work if you didn't know the rules. One of my favorite sayings, know the rules before you can break them. So when I think of the plots, I have the 3-act journey, the 3-act structure. Let's see. There is there's a couple. One of my other favorites is Save the Cat. Is a favorite story structure of mine. I love the Save the Cat method. It's a really good one. There's also a Save the Cat structure for both novels and screenplays. Great elements for formatting and structuring your story so it follows all the different plot beats, all the different points, so it sounds like a real story. And as we think of your character journey, we want your character journey to have an arc. They need to grow. If your character is like this the entire time, and I'm talking about your protagonist, it's going to be kind of a boring story because they're not changing. However, once again, the rule can be broken, right? What if you have a character who's here the whole entire time, but all the supporting characters are extreme versions and they all go through extreme arcs? Of course it can be done. Absolutely. But we're focusing on the basics and the core elements before we try to go break the rules. So our character journey, our hero has to follow an arc, right? They have to start at a certain point. I love to reference this from the Save the Cat method. Hero has to follow an arc. They have to have an opening moment. This is where the story starts. This is where the world that they're in begins. And then the end of the story, the ending moment. How have they changed from I'm like, I'm pointing here. How have they changed from open moment to ending moment? All right, there we go. All right. So this is the story that you're going to tell in a nutshell. This is the story. It's the opening to the ending moment. Now, all the plot points in between is the story. Hey, what's up, man? Welcome, my friend. As I've heard, I know YouTube is sometimes a smoother experience. Glad to have you here. Thanks for joining. If you're just hopping into the stream right now, we're actually just chatting about story structure and how do you really format a story correctly. So, as I was talking about the three elements that go into structuring a story, we talked about plot, character journey, a brief intro to it, and now we're going to touch upon the technical aspects of it. Let's see, I want to make sure you can still see this. Yeah, that's not horrible. So what are the technical aspects that go into structuring your story, right? And I like to, sometimes it gets crossed with grammar, with grammatical things, but I kind of like to group all this into structure. So I like to think that does every single paragraph in your story make sense? Does each paragraph make sense? So you can imagine in a 100,000 word novel, which is the average for long form fiction, how many paragraphs are in 100,000 word novel? A lot. And this is why best-selling authors are successful, because they go back to the revision process, or when they get far enough into it, they hire ghostwriters, they hire editors who take the time to go paragraph by paragraph. The easy trick, and I'll tell you a really easy cheat. If you ever struggle with your paragraphs like not making sense, or sometimes the feedback that you get is like, oh, you know what? He's just not a good writer, or they're not a good writer. Ask yourself this. Does each paragraph have a beginning, middle, and end? Simple as that. This could be anywhere between one sentence up until 20, 30 sentences. But keep in mind, the longer a paragraph, the more you could potentially lose a reader in the early part of the story if they're not hooked on the story yet. So I always like to keep like a rule of thumb. If you're working in 12-point font, let's just assume 12-point Times New Roman, I like to keep that my paragraphs like no longer than maybe like a third of a page. Paragraphs no longer than 1/3 of page. Of course, you can break this. There could be times where it's longer, times where it's shorter, but this is just a good rule of measure. If you pull back, you want to have some white space. If you see a single page with just all words and one single paragraph, it's hard to read. And I mean, it's hard to read for anyone. It might be easy to read for you if it's your story, but it's hard to read for the average reader. So let's make it easy for them. And then another technical aspect of structuring your story, and this is actually a common problem I see, is grammar. Dealing with grammar. The easy thing is we have so many different word processing programs today. You could easily use AI to help with fixing grammar mistakes. I think, let's see, where's my book? A really good older reference to grammar. One second. This is an older one, but this helped me with learning some basic rules of grammar and structure. Strunk and White's The Elements of Style. Great book to check out. Maybe I'll do a video on it or stream on it in the future. But this is a great one to check out if you're still unfamiliar of certain just elements of grammar, structure, and style. This does a great job. It's not even that long. You see, it's a short book. It's a great little intro. You could always Google it as well. Okay. Yeah, so like that's awesome. And I think one of the exciting things about structuring your story correctly is some of these things are really easy to fix. And structure could actually be the one thing that's preventing your story from being read by more people, being read by a larger readership, or it could be the one reason why people think, oh, you know what? They're not a good writer. Because the thing is, I've read so many stories before, and some of them, I can hear it in my head. I could hear so many people would say like, yeah, this story kind of sucks. They're not a good writer. But in my head, I don't think any story is a bad story. Every story just has an opportunity with a problem to be solved, right? I don't think there's any bad stories. Now, of course, there's subjective stories. There's stories that you can strongly disagree with. And there's stories that are both morally correct and immorally correct based on societal norms. But with that understanding, I don't believe there's a bad story. All right, so that's just a couple elements as we think about structure and how do you really structure a story? And you know what? This is why I'm like having so much fun with Story Structure Tuesdays. I'm like, all right, we can focus. We can focus on the one thing today. All right, let me hop into the comments. Vaughn, thesis sentence, and then the main sentence, and then tailoring all writing to this. I think it was MLA format. I had a book in college that had all the deviations, and I got very frustrated. You know what, Vaughn? I can actually totally resonate with you. One of the things I hated the most from having to do college essays and college paper was citing the sources correctly. I hated it. It was frustrating thing. And then I found this fancy website called Citation Machine. And then I used that religiously to do all my citations because I just hated it so much. Now, I think if you're working on a research paper or an essay and you have to cite sources, like it absolutely is important. I understand the need, but the challenge behind it is not one of my favorite things to dig into. Hence why I have such a passion for fiction. Okay. Thanks for sharing that, man. Let's see, Nil, where else you stream? Twitch? Yeah, Nil, first off, welcome to the stream. Thanks for stopping by. So I actually now officially live stream to 5 platforms. And of course, let me welcome you if you're from one of the new platforms that I added last week. So the home to my Kauffman's Corner content, this stream, which is Kauffman Writes, is YouTube. My YouTube channel is Kauffman's Corner. I also stream to Facebook, which I've been streaming to Facebook for a while. And then let's see, I'll drop this for a second. So YouTube, Facebook, I also stream to LinkedIn. Welcome, LinkedIn audience. I wanted to capture the professional writer. Welcome, welcome. And then I'm also streaming to, I'm like brain fart for a second. Of course, Twitch. I love the Twitch. I love the gaming community because at heart, I've always been a gamer. So like gaming community speaks to me. And then X, formerly Twitter. So we have all 5 of those platforms. If you're hailing from any of those platforms, thank you for dropping by. I appreciate y'all. So with that being said, I'll just throw this one back up one more time. 3 elements to focus on: plot, character journey, and technical aspects of your story. Now, what we're going to do next, let's see. Before I hop away from that, are you enjoying the stream? Don't forget to follow and subscribe. I live stream my process every single day because I'm on a mission to show the creative writers around the world that the entire process is fun. Not just the writing, not just the brainstorming, not just the development, the editing, the refining, the publication. The entire process can be fun, and you can make it fun too. And I think that is the core problem we deal with when we are challenged with writer's block. So join me on the journey, and you will be alerted when I come out with my daily live streams, weekly writing videos, and shorts. All right. And then what do we got next? So we're going to hop into our daily writing sprint. So we'll do our writing sprint. And then after our writing sprint, we're actually going to be digging back into some common structure traps, some common problems that writers deal with when trying to structure their story. I've seen so many, and once again, some of them are just easily fixable, easily savable. So we'll hop into common problems. Feel free to drop a question if you have any problem, like common like structure problems that you deal with your stories, and I'll touch upon it after the writing sprint. All right. And thanks, man. Woo, Vaughn, of course, my man. I'm glad to have you here. That is amazing. I always love being able to see you on the stream, my friend. All right, let's see. And then what do we got? So we can't call ourselves writers without a writing sprint and music. So let's say it's been a long week for you and you're just like, you know what? You're not in the mood to really be creative right now. You can actually sit back and watch vicariously, and I'll write for the both of us. You can check out my process and I'll show you what I'm doing as I'm working on Last Scarecrow. All right. So you're feeling creative? Feel free to join me. We're going to be doing 20 minutes. Let me drop this. Perfect. And I got Last Scarecrow all set up. All right. So we got Last Scarecrow, 20-minute timer. Let me get myself to the story. And I'm actually doing pretty good with this. I'm actually really on a roll with where I'm at in Last Scarecrow. All right. So once again, thank you for joining me for Story Structure Tuesdays. All right. Episode 107 of Kauffman Writes. 107 days of writing for 30 minutes a day. Woof, I love it. Okay, so 20 minutes on the clock. And it's time to write now. Vaughn, I'm just reading your comments. Thanks for sharing everything, especially The Last of Us. That is so cool. Last of Us, by the way, whether you haven't seen the TV show or the game, amazing. You should watch. Sorry to hear about the date, though, my man. Hopefully, it's just a sign. The next one will be even better. Hey, what's up, Stephanie? Welcome. And Atomic in the house. Welcome to the stream, my friends. I'm just at the tail end of my first writing sprint. In a very climactic moment, by the way. Hey, welcome to the stream, Momitelli. Welcome. Glad to see we have our normal writing community today. I'm glad to see all you guys here. Wow. All right. That is a great pausing point. Oof. Oh my goodness. It's turning out to be a really good scene. Oh my goodness. I'm feeling great about this scene. I definitely did not know I was going to have this much fun working on this scene in particular. I thought I was going to be doing more setup with this scene once the characters were introduced to the three hags, the shapeshifter, the form changer, and then the turning to be a little bit of a prophet, it looks like. But the heroes have been given 4 questions to ask. The first one was wasted by Pebble. The second one, asked by Stretch, was they didn't get a real answer, they got a non-answer. And then Gore tricked them into revealing a little more than they had, and he tricked them in revealing more by not posing a question but posing a rhetorical statement. In my rewrite, I might work on the validity of it and make it a little bit more discreet so it feels more realistic. But I absolutely love that moment. And now we're getting the real question. What is the weakness of the main antagonist, the first demon, the one who's responsible for the nothingness which we witnessed during the midpoint of the story after Crow's death, literally disintegrating animals left and right with a beam of light. So I'll get to come back to that in writing sprint number 2. All right, so let's hop into... Oh man, all right, let me check the comments. Welcome everyone. It looks like better than TV, right? Almost the CEOs of Amazon and Hollywood are shaking their boots because of the Renaissance. Yeah, Last of Us is a really great show. That's for certain. Definitely a very good show. Looking forward to the second season, hoping it continues to be an incredible experience. Because as anyone knows who's played the second game, the second game does quite a different journey and take than what the first game set out to do. And the second game was very, very divisive. So we'll see how if the TV show of The Last of Us is able to work and elevate what worked for the second game to create less of a divisive reaction. We'll see. I have my thoughts. But in the meantime, what do we got? So common story structure traps. So as we were looking at earlier, I got to start 10-minute break, start the timer. So as I was digging to at the top of the show, and by the way, if you missed the first 20 minutes, I actually touched into, I can pull this back up. I touched upon what are elements of structure, right? Because you found yourself at Story Structure Tuesdays. So we're doing a deep dive into story structure. Then I really define structuring a story based off the plot, the character's journey, and the technical elements of formatting the story, like paragraph structure and sentence and speech tags and all those things. So that's what I consider structure to be in terms of formatting your overall story. All 3 of those work in unison. So with that out of the way, as we think about structuring our stories, I want to hear from you. What are common problems that you run into when trying to structure your story? Let me drop this. Are there any common issues, whether that's you feel like sometimes your story is taking place out of order? Sometimes this can happen when writers are working on different pieces of a story instead of working chronologically. That's absolutely a very common mistake. And it's actually all right. So it's not a bad thing. If you're a writer who you write your story out of order, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Let's say you hit a point of the story, it feels boring. You're like, you know what? I'm just going to come back to it. I'll go write a fun part. That's perfectly all right. You should do that, right? If you're bored of a story, if you're bored of something, rewrite it. If you don't like it, change it. Here's the great thing. You're the master of your own universe. We are the masters of our own worlds, which I love. So if you're struggling, right, you've written your story out of order And now you're trying to figure out like, okay, well, how does this make sense? How come it feels like it's not an overall narrative? Or why does it feel like when someone reads it, like you're missing things? The easy suggestion, you go back to the beginning, and you look at your outline. Your outline is always going to be your saving grace when you write your story out of order. Your outline, which once again, I've touched upon the outline before, but you generally want to use the outline to give you an overall idea of your story structure. Your outline should really include two primary elements. Your outline is going to include the core plot points of your story, and it's also going to include, a lot of the times, the core character journey, the core journey of your protagonist. Now, sometimes they align. Sometimes the character journey, the main core beats of your character journey and the plot are interwoven. But sometimes there's elements of the core story, which isn't technically a plot point, but it's more like a character development moment. And you can have both because you need the character journey. So go back to your outline if that is a problem that you're dealing with, and then figure out where in the story does it feel like it's missing something, right? And if your story has veered off from the outline that you set to tell, that's all right. Adjust the outline. But this is your opportunity to now look at the outline and be like, okay, what do I have? And what is the missing beats of the story to tell a succinct story? Because remember, if we're using structure correctly, we are formatting it and we're using one of the types of structuring elements like the 3-act structure, the save the cat method, the Snyder method is another one. There's a bunch of different styles. I blank out on some of the other common ones because I'm so used to my 3-act structure, at least my own method. I'll make my own structure at one point, and then I'll just call it the Kauffman structure. There we go. We're the masters of our own universe, right? Let's see, Vaughn. Oh, main objective. Person, turquoise, wizard, wand. Okay. I was like, man, turquoise wizard wand. I was like, okay, that sounds like a story right there. We got the core, the elements of another story today. Let's see, best editor ever. That's really people. Yeah, thanks for reflecting back on the beginning of your video. I have this horrible MLA format of making things sound important or sentence structure, but I kind of love the complexities of removing. And this, Vaughn, I'm actually glad you touched upon this because this is a very, very, very a common problem that I see with writers all the time. And it actually affects story structure the most, but we don't realize it. The number one common problem I see with writers is feeling like our story, especially the rough draft, has to be perfect. We feel like because we're writing it, it has to be at a certain level. And if it doesn't match a certain level, then it sucks. The truth is, if some parts of your first draft don't suck, you're either like a genius or you might be doing something wrong. So a lot of the times it's shifting where is success for whatever version of the story that you're working on. And if the version is you feel like it's almost like maybe you're being too much of a perfectionist or it just doesn't feel right, that's okay. Just move right along and then come back to it, right? Especially when we're writing things out of order. Don't delete things. Your deleted sections, move them to a separate Word document, Google Doc, Word Doc, whatever program you use, and save it. Because you never know. You might come back to the idea later, or it might give you an idea and inspiration for something else. Let's see, Stephanie. I think I should have kept my other story the way I have it before. And I think I made a mistake changing it because it was better the way it was. Very perfect example, right? And sometimes we do, right? So sometimes we know that there's a problem with whether it's a scene, a character journey, and the overall way that the story is structured in some way, shape, or form, right? We know there's an issue. We know there's an opportunity. But in our attempts to problem solve it, we usually have to make tweaks. Sometimes it's a character tweak. Sometimes it's dialogue. Sometimes it's just the overall story arc. And then the next iteration that we end up with doesn't always feel as good as what we had originally. That's why I'm always such a proponent of save everything. Now, if you're like writing and you delete the last line, like that's not what I'm talking about. I'm more talking about like if you've written an entire section and then you go back and you're like, "All right, I need to rewrite the section." Now, I rarely ever do that when I'm in the rough draft version. If you've been following me along for the past couple months, I want to say there was one memorable instance. I think I've done it 2 or 3 times now, where I wrote a section of the story and it just didn't feel right. It just did not feel right, because as I was thinking back to my outline, as I was thinking back to the core structure of the overall story, I was thinking of, okay, like I know this is the point that I need to hit. I know this is the type of character development I need to do, but the way I wrote the scene, it doesn't feel right. I was having a gut feeling about it. So what I did was I took the scene, put it on a separate piece of paper. It was about 5 pages, and then I rewrote it. This was, I want to say, at about probably like maybe 35-40% mark in the story. It was before the Colosseum. There's a scene with Pebble. It was the scene when I was actually coming up with the Dragonkin. Actually, I'm pretty sure. I know, Atomic, you were there. Probably a couple of you guys were there. But as the scene when I was developing the Dragonkin, and I knew like I needed to get Pebble from the cliffside where they were at to the Colosseum, which was the next major arc. But the scene I wrote like involved Pebble like flying and like doing things, and it just didn't like feel right. The thing that I had wrote like it involved Crow doing things, and it felt like it was too much. So I deleted it. Not deleted it. I saved it. I went and wrote a completely new segment. And then I wrote the whole segment, 5 pages, and then I looked at it and I'm like, I don't like the segment as much anymore. So I can totally relate with you, Stephanie. That definitely happened to me. And then I think what I ended up doing was I went back to the original, but what I did was I ended up just editing out certain pages. I went back through it and I edited the sections so that it formatted the structure. Let's see, my challenge. My story plot, which I thought was going to be a single novel or a trilogy, has grown to a 5-book series and possible other prequel and sequels. Well, that's actually a good problem to have, right? Because that tells me, Atomic, that you have a really great story with a great universe, great ideas, and great things to tell. So this is actually a good pro tip. If you're working on a story and you know it's a greater story that needs to be told over X number of books, or it's a larger narrative, what I actually recommend, and this is what television shows do all the time, television shows write this thing called a series Bible. If you're a screenwriter, you're familiar with scripts, you probably recognize this concept. If not, essentially what you need to do is you need to make sure that the entire narrative for the entire story is mapped out just in terms of core plot beats, in terms of core moments. Because at heart, essentially, there's an overall story that you want to tell, but you're just breaking it up book by book by book, because there's only each book like is only going to follow one character point of view, or maybe each book can only follow one time span or one series of events or whatever the story is. If you've mapped out the entire structure of the overall story, because the overall story will still have a beginning and an end, whether that's the beginning and the end of one book or the beginning and the end of books 1 through 15. You have that whole outline. It's like a rough outline. Think of it like that. And then you're really going to ask yourself, what are the core beats that I'm establishing in book number 1? And then when you come up with new ideas, you can add it to that overall outline. If you come up with character concepts, add it to that overall outline. But the goal is focus on the one book. I recommend focusing on the one, Atomic, in this instance. That way, you don't get so sidetracked in trying to do all of the books. Like, you want to keep the ideas coming. Don't lose great ideas, but you want to be able to focus your efforts on at least writing, editing, or just working on one book at a time, even if that's just one book in a single day, a single week, or a single month. What I wouldn't want to happen is I wouldn't want you to hop from book to book over the course of a couple months and then get burnt out, or to get like distracted, or to get busy. Like, let's say what happens when life gets crazy again, right? I wouldn't want life to get crazy for you and then for you to lose motivation, because it's just such a grand project and it's a cool project. It's a great story. And by focusing on the one, it makes it easier for you to achieve the consistent and tangible goal. And I think that's essentially how I would go about if I was plotting out a really like large narrative. Prequels and sequels are fun too, but prequels and sequels are generally, I think with a prequel, generally it's prequels tend to be a separate story. They tend to be their own story. So I think it's important to um, confirm and recognize within yourself and your own storytelling elements, is a prequel its own standalone story, or is it part of this greater narrative that I'm building? And I think that'll help as well. Yeah, that would be my recommendation, Atomic. I hope that helps a little bit. I'm actually hoping that you come out with this 5-part book series. Like that sounds really cool. Let's see. Is your brother playing in Coachella? You know what, Vaughn? Little Cough. Good question. Younger Kauffman is a DJ and he is doing all the things, but what he does not play in Coachella. He more you would see him more at probably like an EDM festival. Good question. Let's see, Atomic. I'm not sure if it's from a place of perfectionism, figuring it all out before writing prose, or if it's a good sign that the story is worth telling. Yeah, it's definitely a good sign that the story is worth telling. It absolutely is. I would come at it from it's absolutely that it's a story worth telling. And I think you have so many ideas that this is going to be such an expansive universe, which is amazing because that creates multiple stories, a franchise, all this potential. But just make sure that you don't get lost in the ideation, the development, so that way you can still stay focused on getting that first book out first, even if it takes you a little longer and you're still realistic with how much time you have to write week by week. So yeah. And I would if you're ever trying to like figure out like story beats or different story elements, Atomic, I'm always more than happy to be a brain partner if you're ever like struggling. Let's see. Stephanie, I plan for Redfire to be a 7-book series called the Fire series, and I have 4 out of 7 written. That's amazing, Stephanie. That is incredible. 4 books written out of a 7-book series. Man, Stephanie, I like continue to be impressed with your consistency. of all writers I meet, your consistency and your output with your overall storytelling process is incredible. If you ever want to hear or learn about how to do it consistently, Stephanie is definitely a great role model with writing consistently. Now sometimes some authors, they like to write all the books of a series, or they like to write X number of books before they even put it out there. So that way, if you put one book out there and you make changes like later on, you're like, oh, I realized this character at the end of the story was awesome, and it's actually going to change the course of the second book. That's all right. The truth at the end of the day is that you need to publish a book and put a story out there at whatever rate is right for you, at whatever goal is right for you. So based on whatever your goal is, that's realistic with your lifestyle, if waiting to write all 7 books of a series and put it out in like 5-7 years, maybe that's right for you. Whereas if your goal is like, I just want to get my stuff out there, I want people to read it, then maybe putting out 1 book, or maybe doing chapter excerpts, putting out an excerpt of a book you're working on to build up, to drive a momentum. So it really just comes down to what your strategy is. Yeah, but if you're working on like a large book series, the way that you go about structuring it is completely different. Well, not different. It's just more. It's more time consuming, right? You're investing more time into multiple plot lines that are spanning over the course of multiple novels. Let's see. Oh, dude, if you need a reader, I have a lot of time on my hands. I can read through everything. Awesome, Vaughn. Thank you. So yeah, absolutely. If you're in the comments and if you're in need of a reader, like an alpha or a beta reader, you should definitely reach out to Vaughn. Absolutely. Vaughn's like really improved in his storytelling. Vaughn has some absolutely incredible works of nonfiction and some fiction writing that are really coming along, which is really cool. Really, really cool. Thanks for sharing that, man. That's awesome. Yeah, I really thought The Last of Us could have been a standalone. I feel like they're kind of ruining the main story with all this nonsense above. I've been trying to follow other characters. It is. If you're following the story of The Last of Us, the second one is it's divisive for a reason. I enjoyed it, but it is a different story. Completely different story. But whether you're a gamer or you're waiting for the series, which I think season 2 will be probably next year is my guess. I hope it'd be this summer. That'd be cool. But yeah, Last of Us is a very good story at heart, and it's definitely worth watching the series because the story is so succinct. And I would probably argue that video game adaptations, if you've ever seen a video game adaptation, my favorite one of all time was the original Super Mario movie, which was a piece of garbage, but I enjoyed it because it was a piece of garbage. But video game adaptations to the screen are generally not very well done because they don't stick to the core idea of the story of what the story is intended for, while also adapting it for a different audience. It's a hard thing to balance. That's why it's easier for books. That's why book adaptations are so much easier to pull off, because you're just adapting the story. And usually readers translate to the screen pretty well. Gamers don't always translate to the screen because there's different desires and needs. Last of Us, I would argue, is one of the best adaptations of a video game to a media franchise that I would argue. Yeah. I also recently saw, what was the other Fallout. Fallout was an interesting series, but I never played the game too much, so I can't really speak to them. Stephanie, I also have a lot of tattoos that have to do with the series that serve as a reminder to not give up until it's done. Talk about like that's the motivation right there, right? Like everybody, like you need to find a motivation that works for you and that drives you, and it could be different for everyone. Stephanie, if I had a tattoo of a story on me and I was like looking at that every day, and if I was like hustling with like doing like 2 or 3 jobs and the family life and the dating and writing and all the things, I would be so motivated AF to be writing, especially if I was like working on a day and I didn't feel like it, but like, this pain will help me remember. That's a great strategy, Stephanie. Thanks for sharing. I'm glad that's actually helped in working for you. I never would have thought about doing that as an actual motivation strategy. Hey, what's up, John H? Welcome to the stream. Thanks for stopping by. This is the guy that has the cookbook on Amazon, right? This is the guy that has the cookbook on Amazon. Ooh, I'm not sure which one, which guy you're referring to specifically, because I know we were talking about Last of Us, some of the video game adaptations. The problem with Disney today. Oof. I mean, Disney, I've seen most of, like, when we think of Disney, right? We think of Marvel, Star Wars, Pixar, and then the Disney movies that come out. I think that Disney has a lot of opportunities and a lot of, I'll just say opportunities. They've had a lot of wins, a lot of losses. And I think at heart, Disney's not going to change, because Disney, most of their stuff follows a formula that they've been doing consistently for a while. And their last couple of years have shown that there's such thing as burnout. People get tired of the same formula. There's times where it works, right? There's a reason that the Infinity War saga killed box office. That was amazing. But since then, the television series, which they recycled the formula from the previous series, even though it's a completely different concept, is still struggling. Same reason for Star Wars. The same reason Star Wars struggles, because a lot of the series follow the same concept. Now, sometimes it works. Sometimes they're allowed to do these productions and these stories where they have this formula as an underlying layer, but they're able to do it differently in a way that makes it feel like it's a niche audience, when really it's layered as a niche thing, but it's really Disney as the subtextual, their format and their cycle. I mean, I'm hit or miss. There's some things that I enjoy and some things that I don't. I think it really just depends as a viewer what your preferences are and what your level of how you determine quality. Absolutely. I tattooed my first book's artwork on my back. Oh, that's amazing. Oof, that must have been painful. I like when I think of the tattoo process, I think of like the painful spots to get a tattoo. And I'm like, oh, that spine does not sound like a place I mean, I'm assuming it's on the spine. Maybe it's probably not on the spine, but I was like, oh, I just try to imagine like getting a tattoo on the spine, or I've heard that the rib, is it the ribs? I think is not a good place as well. I have 0 tattoos, but there's only one tattoo that I want to get, and I've been planning it for years. And when I have the finances to invest in that, I will do so. There's only one. I don't want more than one. I don't want less. There's just one, and I will get it eventually. That is a really good and intelligent way to describe the Disney thing. Yeah, I mean, I've watched a lot of the Disney. Like, I've watched a lot of theories on Disney culture. I've seen a lot of the Disney stuff. I appreciate a lot of the things that Disney's done. I appreciate a lot of things they've done for Star Wars and Marvel. At the same time, Disney is a monopoly. They're a business at the end of the day. So you have to recognize that, right? I would say my expectations for Disney content ranges somewhere between low to medium. I don't expect incredible stuff to happen. If it does, I'll be pleasantly surprised. Yeah. Oh God, I couldn't imagine with the tattoo. Oof. Oh. Let's see. You have 28 tattoos. Oh my goodness. You know what? I've had friends like that, Stephanie, who are like really big on tattoos and who are like really consistent. Like, all right, I got it. I gotta like fill up the whole body with tattoos. My brother's like that. He literally has just finished he's working on his second sleeve. It's amazing. You must have a really high pain tolerance. That's what I always think about when I talk with friends who have a lot of tattoos. I'm like, you must have incredible like physical pain tolerance. That's really good for you. But that's awesome because then you have all the different images of all the different things that mean something to you. Disney has changed so much. I think Walt is spinning. You know what? Maybe Walt just never died. He's just controlling the conglomerate from his cryo tube in the Disney basement. Maybe that's what really happened. Walt Disney is just always going to be Walt Disney's brain. He's going to be the controlling figure of Disney from now until the end of time. Yeah. But I agree. Disney has changed a lot. But most businesses do, right? Businesses that don't change and adapt to the times no longer don't survive. Businesses that don't survive, don't make money, they become irrelevant, and all businesses need to attract customers, make money, and grow if they want to stay relevant. Awesome. Let's see. I just started an Alice in Wonderland sleeve. Oh, that's actually really cool. Alice in Wonderland is such a cool story. Some of the retellings hit or miss. Sometimes they've been hit or miss, but the core Alice in Wonderland story is really cool. Absolutely loved the core Alice in Wonderland. So as I am, they have to change in their yeah. And that's the challenge, Mommy Telly. The majority of fans you ask have a different perception and different perspective on what is the right direction. For Disney, the right direction is whatever speaks to their stakeholders' interests. For a lot of the fans, the right direction is what speaks to their fandom and their interests as fans, right? So it just depends. Hopefully they do well. It's my hope that companies like that more independent artists continue to do well in their scripts. We get more studios that put out great stuff. I would rather there be more major studios that are putting out great content because it creates a more fair playing system as compared to everyone having to watch all their content on Disney, Netflix, Amazon, Apple. That'd be my preference. It's so strange how so many people here have me blocked. I haven't even met these people. It's so strange how many people here have me blocked. I haven't met these people. Yeah, I'm not. Good question. I'm not sure. Not sure how to answer that. It could be, John, that maybe it's not that people have you blocked. It could be like maybe a setting is is off, whether that's in a YouTube. I know there's a weird thing I dealt with actually on Facebook recently where like I couldn't befriend somebody, and like I never experienced that before. Sometimes it could just be a factor of the system you're using. That brings up a good topic, writing with your intended audience in mind. You hit the nail on the head, my friend. If you're writing a story that you intend to publish and you want people to read, you got to keep your audience in mind. You should write for yourself first. I think having fun for your story should take precedence, but keeping the audience in mind is also important. If you're working on your first story, right, you're still probably don't really know your audience yet. You could be researching, maybe you do, maybe you don't. That's part of the process. But keeping in mind who you're writing for is absolutely incredible. John, you are really smart. Oh, shucks. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. You know what? I've developed a motto throughout life. I have three terms that I try to put out: be kind, be confident, and be creative. That's my life motto at this stage of my life. And I feel like as long as everything that I do aligns with one of those three elements, I'm doing right by me. And if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, because life can be short, and not to live in fear, but to be realistic within myself, then I will minimize the amount of regret that I will live in life. And that's how I like to live. John H., you might be following someone. John H., you might be following someone they have block lists. That's possible as well. So something with streamers or something with YouTube streamers, if for any reason you're in a YouTube stream and you do something that maybe either violates the streamer's guidelines, or maybe you do something that they don't like for whatever reason, as streamers, we do have the option to add users to a block list. For example, if somebody came here and they started like cussing out one of you, or if they started doing something that just didn't really feel right with my values. Now, if somebody can express their opinions, that's fine. I'm fine with people expressing opinions, but I'm not fine with people being unkind about it. Then what I would do is I would kick them out and I would add them to the block list so they couldn't return. Let's see, Bobicus. I just replotted a huge section of my story. Fortunately, I haven't written it yet. Sure. A huge section of my story. Well, that's great. That's actually really good, Bobicus, that you mapped it out before you hopped into it. I always think that like mapping out the overall story is a win. I know every writer's different. Some writers like to hop into it, but I'm always of the mind that even if you just like to like hot write on the fly, which is great, have some idea of what you're structuring, but don't spend all your time structuring. Otherwise you never write the story, right? So it's balance. But that's awesome. That's incredible. And I think even with structure, like I think even with Last Scarecrow, right? I mean, like how many words am I at with Last Scarecrow now? So like Last Scarecrow is 74,000. So I'm at 74K words. And I want to say that it was a free write, 2-page free write on Kauffman Writes day 1. I didn't return to it until Kauffman Writes day 15. And then I've been working on it ever since, right? But then by the time I hit about day 25, I stopped myself because I'd just been treating it as a free write. And I spent a whole 2 streams writing an outline for it because I knew there was a big story that I wanted to tell and I wanted to have an idea of my direction. And there's a couple of times where it's changed. And then whenever it changes, every like X amount of chapters, I'll go back and I'll just readjust, right? Outlines are not the only compass. They're a tool to be used in your overall journey of creating a story. Let's see, John. That has to be what it is. I have voiced conservative values and I'm in the LGBT community. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. I am in the LGBT community as well. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I think sometimes it's difficult online because the internet can be so divisive, right? And sometimes we can say something and we could be responded to and perceived a certain way because we say something, or we could say something and be responded to in a way that is outside of our our concern, and then we assume. Sometimes we assume that we're perceived that way because of what we said. We could be right, we could be wrong. Either option could be right or wrong. Regardless, it's the internet's a tricky thing. It's a tricky thing, my friends. You can, especially when you get into topics that are trending and topics that are hotly debated, especially with like not pop culture, but like news, live events. There's a reason that like news streamers who do like news content, influencers who do news, it is very difficult to be a news influencer because it's so easy to get a lawsuit. It is so easy. So that's that is definitely a tough one. Not even one that I'm quite certain yet how I would navigate as I continue on this journey. That's a good way to live. Thank you. Thank you. But let me tell you, it took me a while to get here, right? It took me a while to really understand myself, understand my self-awareness, who I am, what I want out of life, what was important to me, what wasn't. And then when I realized that only took me 20 to 30 something years of living. I was right with myself. I found that when I was young, throughout high school, college, I was extremely immature, which is actually very common for guys, for males. And then I hit a point where huge maturity point, 20s, 30s, I hit an even greater point, and I feel good. I feel good about my overall motto with life. And I would hope that throughout my journey of whoever I affect in the world, that more people can be opinionated, but that they will respond with kindness. And that I hope more writers will take away that you can have fun with the process and you can be confident in your writing. Even if the writing is the worst piece of garbage in the world and it's like the worst thing we've ever seen, you can still be confident in it because it's yours. Enjoy that it's your garbage and then do something about it. Let's see in Bobicus. One of my problems with story structure advice is that most advice for it demands a positive character arc. My first book was a tragedy and did not fit the structure. Interesting. I feel like we might have chatted about this in a previous stream a while ago. Bobicus, so when you say that, is it like more like your specific story structure didn't match like a 3-act structure? I think if I recall correctly, I think you're saying like your hero wasn't following like a very like traditional hero's journey, and your protagonist was a very static hero. If I recall, I could be wrong. Yeah, and I mean, like, I think I would argue that every story needs structure, but certain stories, they're going to follow a very unnormal structure. It was the same thing that I touched upon really early in the live stream of like, if your story doesn't have a climax of some type, your story might be boring. And usually, predominantly, the climax happens anywhere between 70 to 90% through your story. And that's just like the norm. That's the average, right? You never want to put it somewhere else other than that period, or else you chance your hero not having a fulfilling arc. However, things that movies love to do is they love to throw the climax in at the very beginning and then use the climax as a hook to lead up to the story to the climax. So almost like they use the climax as a foreshadowing. And I think that's a perfect example of knowing the rule, breaking it, and then doing it differently or successfully for that format. So my guess, Bubicus, is you probably are just followed a different style of structure for your story, that was more suited for a tragedy. That would be my guess without knowing like too many of the details. Oh man, these are some great conversations, by the way. Thanks all for joining. Thanks all for being active. I love getting to chat with other writers. I realized that if I couldn't travel to other writers, hopefully other writers would come join the community. So thanks for joining, friends. Let's see, I'll be back later. Not really cool about this box thing. I am a nice and live streams and get in the chat. I'll hit you later. All right, yeah, good luck with it, my man. Let's see. Atomic, either the protagonist has to change or the world does. There are definitely characters that devolve as the story progresses rather than experiencing growth. Yeah, and absolutely. So, right, something has to change, right? If nothing changes in a story, it would just lose the readers and you lose people's interest. But I think there could be a story. I think you could do a story where there was a static protagonist that doesn't change throughout the story. I think it would be possible, but you would have to do it in a way where all the supporting characters and all the things that happen around the character are extraordinary or interesting. You actually see this so commonly in comedies. Comedy television shows, 9 times out of 10, the main protagonist is a very neutral character because it's intended for us to connect and view the show through this neutral protagonist's eyes, and all the other characters around the protagonist are zany and extraordinary. Most comedy and sitcoms, that happens a lot. It used to happen a lot more during the golden age, not as predominant anymore, but that is a style. Let's see. One thing that, and let's see what I got. And I'm a writer. Yes. Love it. I love it. I'm even more proud that all writers unite. I think it comes up to us creative writers to put out great stories and great messages to the world. Let's see. One thing that may get in the way is forgetting the theme. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, theme's absolutely important. I mean, if you guys actually tuned into my very first Creative Right Now podcast, you should actually go check that one out after this. That was my first podcast this Sunday, and I actually chatted with published author Mike Clausen about how to structure your story around theme, and he goes into that in his book. It was actually a really good podcast episode. Definitely, yeah, it's the Creative Right Now podcast. Definitely go check that out if you want to learn anything about theme after the stream. But I think that for me, the overall theme really resonates with what is the core message of the story that I'm trying to tell. So it's like, for instance, right, Last Scarecrow I've been packaging it as a post-apocalyptic fairy tale. My core message of the story is, what does it mean to be human in a world where humans no longer exist? It's my core message. And hopefully I can deliver on it by the time the confrontation with the first demon happens. Let's see. You can have a hyper competent hero that is fun to watch. These characters don't change much, like James Bond or Batman. You could. I mean, that's actually like that character type is its own type where they have a extremely high skill set. Kind of similar to, I mean, both of Harrison Ford. When I think of like Indiana Jones, Han Solo from Star Wars, where Tomb Raider, Lara Croft is another one. It's a character set where it's a high skill set, and they're fun because we get to go on the journey of them being awesome. They are amazing at what they do. And we get to experience that we're amazing with what they do because it's a power fantasy. Subconsciously, it's a power fantasy because we want to envision, oh yeah, I could be like Batman and do all the cool things if I was rich too and I had the gadgets and the technology. But yeah, usually the normal character weaknesses for that is because they have a high level of skill. Usually the antagonist has to have an extreme the antagonist's philosophy has to directly challenge the protagonist's skill. So the antagonist has to be even worse, has to do things that make the hero's skill hard to use, or the hero has to have some type of weakness that at times can make their skill not effective because it's usually some sort of psychological, or maybe they can only do their thing with family around, for instance. Great call out, LeMay. Stephanie, I don't have a lot of writer friends IRL, so I love streams like this and I learn things I didn't know about writing. Oh, I love that. I absolutely love to hear that, Stephanie. I'm glad. No, that's really cool to hear. When I was thinking about how I want the live stream experience, Kauffman Writes, to be perceived long term, I know one of the things that I really appreciated in my journey throughout different writers groups throughout my 20s is I loved the community, the collaboration, being able to talk about writing stuff, being able to also do the storytelling. And I was hoping that I could emulate that experience while also using it as motivation and a form of discussion in the long term. So that's really cool to hear. Thanks for sharing that. Bobby Kiss. Most adventure fiction and highly serialized fiction is driven by flat character arc characters. Adventure fiction. It can be actually a lot of the time because a lot of like adventure stories. Now I don't read as much adventure and novels and storytelling. I've seen my share of action movies, but a lot of that style of storytelling revolves more around the visual of bang bang, the explosions, all the big things are happening because once again the character themselves don't actually have to be an extraordinary character. They have to be they have to have enough of a skill set to survive in a world that's extremely dangerous. Absolutely. LeMay. Smiley face. I agree. I was like, smiling. Let's see, Stephanie. The core message I have with Redfire is be careful who you trust. It's a great message. That's an absolutely great message to revolve the story around, right? Because we have to trust so many people throughout our lives. And if we're not careful about how we place our trust, we're not clear about boundaries, if we're not clear about expectations, we're not clear about our needs and our desires, then 9 times out of 10, your trust will be taken advantage of, right? And I think that actually it's a fun message to explore. It absolutely is. And that probably would, and that resonates, I'm sure, with a lot of people because most people have to trust somebody throughout their lives, whether that's family, friends, or themselves. Hopefully you get to a point where you can trust yourself. Let's see. And Mommy Talia, perhaps their change happened in the beginning of their story. Sometimes that could be a thing. So like sometimes with that type of character arc, sometimes you can do a character where the character goes through an intense change, either during the first, the change is kind of used as the, why am I blanking on it? The change is usually used as the moment in the first 15 to 20 minutes of the story. And then that change isn't touched upon until the end of the story. That's usually used in movies. I think Taken. It's been a while since I've seen Taken. It usually happens a lot when something really extreme happens to a character. Forefront of my mind now that I have Disney is Punisher is another example of it. Since they're bringing Punisher and all those characters back. But usually when a character is like suffered a huge tragedy in the beginning, the entire story is kind of like their healing journey for the most part. But because the healing is really told through all the actions and all the things that happen throughout, the main core of their story doesn't really conclude until the very end. And sometimes that happens before the story even starts, right? And the story is actually their response to the big thing that happened. So there's other two character types, absolutely, which can be fun to do. Yeah, and it really just also depends on what like the intent is of the story and how you want to go about what type of story you want to tell. And back to structuring a story in a way that serves the plot, the character, and all the technical elements of do your paragraphs work? Do the dialogue tags work? Is it grammatically correct? Is it visually? Can I read entire page of fiction and not look at one long paragraph? Like that's might make readers tune out. Yep. So it's a bunch of things like that. Absolutely. All right. Well, those are some absolutely wonderful conversations. So let's see. All right, let's do it. I was like, I'm pushing on time today, but let's do it. I'm in a really great moment in my story. Writing sprint number 2. We're gonna do it. Let's go. I'm at a great moment in the story. Feel free to read along. Once again, I think I actually know where I'm going with the rest of this chapter right now. So writing sprint number 2, 20 minutes, music up. Let's see, I got this. I am set. Maybe I'm set. Nope, 10-minute break. Set. All right, 20 minutes on the clock. Feel free to join me or read along. 20 minutes and it's time to write now. All right, and that brings us to the end of the writing sprint. I hope you are able to get some good writing accomplished. I felt accomplished. I literally finally hit that moment in the chapter. I was like, that was a good moment to end off on too. I was really happy with how that moment came out, especially with the questions, them anticipating that the question really should be, right? How are they going to stop the nothingness, the first demon? When realistically, the only thing Scarecrow wants to know, as all classic heroes do, because this is the one of the most common questions for a hero's journey, and I'm doing it very intentionally, is why me? Whew. So I was very happy with that. I think that was a good ending moment. And then all the friends expecting that the Scarecrow just asked the stupidest question, and the hags respond. Now that Scarecrow is the right question. So we will get to continue this journey and see what it means tomorrow as we are making our way into the later portion of this novel. I would say right now this probably marks I'm probably somewhere between 60 to 65% through this novel right now. I think I might be closer to 65%. I think I'm getting closer to 65%. Oof, the stakes are about to get higher. So I had fun. I'll get to continue on my writing sprint tomorrow. Thank you for joining today. We had some absolutely phenomenal phenomenal discussions about structure. And thanks for joining me for, I think I got it right there on the whiteboard. Right there, you can see it very shortly. Story Structure Tuesdays. I hope you got some value out of structuring your story, and we had some great conversations. But when I think about what is on the morrow, creative writing on the morrow, because tomorrow is going to be one of my favorite days of the week, World Building Wednesdays. So come join me and come join us as we're going to be talking about how do you develop a believable world. And if there's one thing that I've learned a lot about in my time as a writer, one of the first things I researched when I was young was how to build an effective fantasy world. So join us tomorrow for World Building Wednesdays. And by the way, I will link any of the videos I referenced throughout. If you want to learn more about theme, go check out the new Creative Right Now podcast about theme, published author. I think that was the main one. Awesome. If you want to learn a little bit about plot, we touched upon plot yesterday for Plot Point Monday. All right. Yeah, we touched upon yesterday Plot Point Monday. And that is a lot of value. Of course, Mommy Telly. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate that you're taking the time to come be involved. And hopefully y'all are getting some value and having some fun as well. I'm glad that we're able to come together as creative writers. And by the way, don't forget to tap that like button on your way out. Let me know that you got value from this stream. That's all that I got for you, creative writers. It has been my absolute pleasure. Don't forget that words are wind, but stories are forever. I'm Kauffman, and I'll catch you on the flip side.